Okay, today we're going to be talking about Nahom. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to jump ahead to 1 Nephi 16:34, and it came to pass that Ishmael died and was buried in the place which was called Nahom. Alright, I've been getting a few comments on the channel. Some people seem to disregard the literary evidences and the internal evidences in the Book of Mormon, and are asking for external evidences or archaeological evidences. Well, we're going to talk about one today from this verse, a place which was called Nahom. Alright, so there's a pattern in the Book of Mormon with Nephi that you'll notice, and this is another evidence of this is authentically Nephi, in the sense that he's the only one that does this consistently. Proof to me that there's separate authors in the Book of Mormon. But anyway, in 1 Nephi 2:5, and it came down by the borders near the shore of the Red Sea. So he identifies the Red Sea, right? That's a real place. We know where the Red Sea is. It doesn't prove anything necessarily that the Red Sea was there, but now he's kind of put himself in a pickle. Now we know where he was and can go kind of identify these places as they go. So he set himself up for some anachronisms, really, if he's going to identify the location of their journey. But he does, nonetheless. So in 1 Nephi 2:6, and it came to pass that when he had traveled 3 days in the wilderness, he pitched his tent by the valley by the side of a river of water. And it came to pass that he called the name of the river Laman. So they begin this pattern here now. If they don't know the name of something, they just name it. If it doesn't have a name, if it doesn't have people there to tell them what the name is, they give it a name. And this is actually very consistent with ancient Bedouin tradition, and it's something that Bedouins still do today. When they come upon something that they don't know the name of, the first item on the agenda is usually to give that place or land feature a name. In 1 Nephi 1:16, in the valley which he called Lemuel. 1 Nephi 16:13, we did call the name of the place Shazer. 1 Nephi 17:6, and we did come to the land which was called Bountiful. Autocorrect changed Nephi to nephew there. In 17:5, we beheld the city which we called Ariantum. Again, supposed to be Nephi 17:5. And it came to pass that after we had sailed for the space of many days, we did arrive in the promised land. We went forth upon the land, and we did pitch our tents, and we did call it the promised land. So this is just consistently, this is what they do. They're naming things along the way in the journey. Except, in the verse we're talking about today, we have an anomaly. And it came to pass that Ishmael died, and he was buried in the place which was called Nahom. They didn't name Nahom, it was already called Nahom. They buried him in this place. We don't know where he died. We know that he died, and then they buried him in a place that was called Nahom. So this is essentially a situation in the Book of Mormon that is asking for a fight. Hugh Nibley talks about the Book of Mormon as a book that's asking for a fight. Well, this is a verse that's asking for a fight. Like Nahom, show me where Nahom is, because it's in the book that there should be a place called Nahom in somewhere in the Saudi Arabian desert. So if we're going to find Nahom, there's some things we have to understand. The Hebrew alphabet has no vowels when it is written. The letters only mark consonants, which means that when you look at the word, you have no idea how it's pronounced necessarily. Such alphabets are known as abjads. So this is very common, so we got to find NHM if we're going to find this place. We take out the vowels. People that were reading and then transcribing would have to insert their own vowels at their best guess. In 1829, there were no known source materials in North America referencing NHM or any of its variations. There was nothing that would have been available to Joseph Smith in 1829 showing anything referring to Nahom, NHM in any of its variations. In 1976, Lynn and Hope Hilton visited Oman, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel on a church assignment from the Ensign. They were looking at a potential journey that Lehi took, and they proposed a spot where Nahom should be. So obviously we've talked about the Valley of Lemuel. We found that. Then they've journeyed in a southeasterly direction after they hit the Camp of the Broken Bow. So they're varying. They fade away from the Red Sea a little bit. And Lynn and Hope Hilton presumed that they hit Nahom east of the southern part of the Red Sea before they turned due east on the 19th parallel and found Bountiful. So that location, there's only one way for this to work in the Book of Mormon. There's only one path. It's the incense trail. It's the frankincense trail. This trail was used daily by lots and lots and lots of people. In fact, in my opinion, Lehi had taken this trail to modern-day Yemen before. I don't think they stayed on the trail for reasons that we'll discuss in other videos. I think they stayed off the trail, but this was a trail that was well known to the people of this area, and I think Lehi especially, all the way up till they get to where Nahom should be. And then from that point on, there is just nothing. It's just a brutal, empty quarter there from Nahom to Bountiful. But this is the only place Nahom could be. You can't cross over those mountains that are further east. You can't. They have to stay on that side of the Red Sea. This is a common trail, the frankincense trail. This is where Nahom should be in modern-day Yemen, down here at the bottom of the screen. And Lynn and Hope Hilton kind of discovered this is where it should be, with no evidence that anything was actually there. In 1988, this is just 30-40 years ago, the German Institute of Archaeology began an excavation project looking for a link to Queen Sheba. So Yemen is well known in the biblical community as the home of Queen Sheba, who visited Solomon. Now I looked up, we have from 1988 and 1989, we have the agreement between the Federal Republic of Germany and Yemen to allow the German Institute of Archaeology to continue their dig in Yemen. I looked it up. I read the whole agreement. But interestingly enough, in 1988, they found an altar with the inscription NHM. It was found. So, nearly 150 years after the Book of Mormon was translated and published, the location mentioned in the book had archaeological evidence and proof that it existed, where it was before unknown. So the altar, the inscription was Abiathar, son of Sodom, son of Nahom, from Nahom. So this was huge, and not to mention it was dated between 700 and 800 BC, 100 to 200 years before Lehi and Nephi would have crossed its path. So this wasn't put in after, this was put in before Lehi and Nephi would have crossed the path, found the location, found the tribe of Nim or Nahom, and buried Ishmael there in that city. So you can say that that's just one lucky guess, but now we've found multiple other altars referencing Nim or NHM. We found an old Danish map that wasn't available in the Americas till after the Book of Mormon was published. We found an old German map that wasn't available to Joseph Smith till after the Book of Mormon was published. We found an ancient palm leaf inscription, all showing the area and the place called Nahom. So we know with surety, I think, through multiple findings and archaeological evidence, that there was indeed a place there called Nahom, which could not have been known to Joseph Smith or any American at that time. But it gets even, as most things in the Book of Mormon do, it gets even more interesting. The meaning of Nahom in Hebrew means to mourn or to come to terms with a death. Now we already know Nephi's propensity for puns, and from the very first verse of the Book of Mormon, when he uses a pun on his own name, saying, I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, when Nephi, the translation of Nephi, is goodly. So this is not authentic to Nephi. This is authentic to Hebrew and Jewish writing, that this is what they love to do, is make these puns. And Now let's read it in that context. And it came to pass that Ishmael died and was buried in a place which was called Nahom, meaning to mourn or to come to terms with death. In 1 Nephi 16:35, the daughters of Ishmael did mourn exceedingly because of the loss of their father. He literally defines the term Nahom in the very next verse and uses it in the story just as a very, very authentic Jewish writing, Jewish pun, giving us further evidence that not only was Nahom a city, a place, it was a word that he was familiar with, and that whoever is writing this is very, very intimately familiar with Semitic language and Semitic writing customs. So we have the place, we have the meaning of the name, we have a pun, and oh, by the way, in 1936 they discovered in this area the largest known burial site in the Arabian Peninsula. Remember, this is the place they buried Nahom. Well, this is the biggest graveyard on the frankincense trail. This is the most likely position that someone would be buried. Wasn't discovered until 100 years after the Book of Mormon was published. So what are the chances of getting these things right? So I've read people that said, oh, all he had to do was pick 3 consonants and he happened to get those right, but those are really common consonants. He could have gotten lucky, and they write it off. Especially, there's a few people that I've heard that say, oh, apparently they didn't have vowels. No, they didn't use vowels. That's not apparently, that's a fact. They didn't use vowels in this language. NHM is how it would be written. And the chances of him guessing those 3 letters correctly, with 16 consonants to choose from, 3 letters, 1 chance, 16 times 16 times 16 gives us 4,196. So 1 in 4,096 chance, that's 0.024%. The chances of him accidentally making a Hebrew pun, which means that he accidentally used working backwards. If he had the definition of a word and he wanted to predict what that word was and call the city that, he would have had to choose from 33,000 Hebrew words. He picked the correct one, assuming he didn't know Hebrew, as most of the people that comment on this channel assume. The chances of him accidentally making a Hebrew pun would be 0.003%. Now, the chances of predicting the location is a graveyard. So he's predicted the location, he's predicted the name, he's predicted the pun, and now there's a graveyard there where he says someone was buried. 1% of Earth's land its surface is cemetery, and so he would have to pick a place. He would have a 1% chance of guessing a spot where there's a cemetery. The chances of doing all 3 is 0.00003, giving Book of Mormon credence and evidence, archaeological evidence of its truthfulness at 99.99997% chance of it being authentic.